Thank you for joining me for a walk in the garden. I'm Liz Davey, and this is one of the episodes of a garden show that's filmed at my Norfolk garden. And this is the end of February. Our last episode was filmed here about a month ago, a little over a month ago. And we didn't have any snow then. It looked like it might even be a fairly open winter without much snow. Well, that changed really fast. And now we have tons of snow. In fact, it's been a record winter. There's snow everywhere. Everybody's down to digging paths, a few paths to get around. We're a long ways from planting a garden, although it will come. Today happens to be a sunny day, and we're starting to get some melting, which is a really good sign. There are a few things that you can do outside besides shovel snow in this weather. One of the temptations, if you have shrubs that are covered, as they come uncovered, is to brush the snow off them. But actually, with most shrubs, you're better off letting the snow melt on its own. You're liable to do a lot more damage trying to get the snow off the shrubs than they will take care of themselves once they thaw and the snow melts off of them. The other thing that I've needed to do is I have the fish pond, and it does have an ice melter in it. However, with the heavier snows, I do need to remove that snow in order to get down to the ice melter. It's important for me, at least, and I hope for most people, to use a melting product on the ice that is safe for pets and children. There are such things, and it does help with our dogs and also children not to get into dangerous chemicals. Also, you don't want them in your yard particularly. Good old sand works well, and that is pretty safe too. If you happen to have a bag of sand, you can sweep that up easily come spring. We're waiting for the snow to melt, and most of our garden activities in the next month will probably take place indoors, at least a month until this goes down. We are getting melting, the sun is higher in the sky, and at some point we will be able to get out here and see what, if any, damage has been done and take down the Christmas decorations that were still up when it started to snow and are pretty much frozen in place. Hopefully they'll come down before Easter. Now let's go inside and do some indoor planting and also a little cooking. Even though the weather outside is pretty snowy still, and there's a lot of time before we can actually get out in the garden, it is getting to be time to start seeds. And so we're going to start a few today, some of the early ones. You don't want to start them too early. I've taken a calendar. I get a couple calendars in the mail, and I save one, and I've marked back, and you may be able to see the numbers I've put on the calendar. I've marked back from May 15th, which on most years is our last frost date, the week of May 15th. That would be 0. And then I moved back to see what would be 10 or 12 or 6 or 7 weeks before that. So we're sitting here right now at between 12 and 11. We're about 11 to 12 weeks before our last frost. Is that going to be affected by all this snow? Who knows? You can't really tell, but the plants can stay inside a little bit longer. However, you want them ready when it's time to go in the garden. The other thing I've done is I've ordered all my seeds, and I've organized them in a box into groupings. The group that I'm going to be starting inside, and then ones that I plant outside earlier and later. And I've also put those on my calendar so I know when to plant. So this will be my planting calendar for this season. And once I've planted them, I'll mark it on this calendar and probably put it in my little garden journal as well. But the calendar will keep me on track so that hopefully things will be ready to plant at the right time. And having them grouped means that I won't look there in June and find a seed that I should have planted inside in April. Today I'm going to be planting some onions. Onions are one of the things that can be planted very early, and they can go in even as early as the first part of February. And for this I'm going to use a germinating mixture. I do buy a little soil each year. Obviously we can't get anything out of the garden right now if we even wanted to. But the germinating mixture that I buy has been moistened. And I'm using a container that came with produce. And I poked some holes in the bottom of it so that it will drain. And you can also use planting boxes if you want to buy those, or other containers. But this works pretty well. And I'm going to put a couple inches in here because the onions are going to stay in here until they're transplanted out into the garden. At least that's my intent. Now I'll pat that down. And I'm going to make some little furrows in this, and I've got a little indoor garden tool, and I'll make some very shallow little furrows. And I'm going to make about 4 little furrows. Kind of like a miniature garden, planting little rows. Got some rows, and then we'll take our, I have 2 different kinds of onions, a white onion and a red onion. And this seed is small, and for this I like to use my bare hand. These are the white onions. And we'll spread them thinly in this furrow and this one. We'll do 2 of each. We'll have some left. And then we'll barely cover it and pat it down. And I'll do the same with the red onions. I often do use sets in the garden. This year I decided to try some onion seeds. I might do some sets as well for early scallions or onions, though I do have some scallion seed that I will plant in the garden very early. And then the 4th row. These will be close, and we'll break them apart when we set them out. Hopefully in another month or so, maybe 2 months. Probably be early April at the earliest this year. I'll cover these a little bit. Then I can put them under my plant lights, and I can actually use the top on top of this again to keep the moisture in the container. Or I can put it underneath. And once they've germinated, I'll put it underneath in order to hold in the water that I use to water the plants. These will go under the plant lights. The other thing I can plant now is celery. And again, I'll use the germinating mix for that. I like to use these planting containers. They've been fairly successful for me. This bottom container will hold water, and this is a piece of fabric that comes with the container, and I've wet it. It is damp right now, and put it over this top. It will actually have the ends sitting in the water that's underneath. This will provide all the moisture for these seedlings as they come up. And it's important to get it under so that indeed it is in the water. Poke it right in there. Wrap it around the top. And then we can fill it. There's a little spot at the bottom where you can pour water in. I'll add the planting soil to each of these top cubes. I start most of my plants this way. We'll be starting more as the weeks wear on here into planting time. But you need to firm this moist mixture into each of the cells. Fill them all the way up, pretty much. You won't be watering them from the top, only from the bottom. This helps a little bit with diseases like damping off and other plant diseases. This is a sterile soil too, so that helps as well. There are no weed seeds in it, so whatever comes up should be the plants that you have planted. Have a little extra space. And I'll open the celery seeds. Celery is something you usually think of buying, but it really is good if you grow a few yourself. And this will be plenty of celery. We'll have a dozen plants here, and that will provide us with more celery than we want, probably. You can share some. These seeds are quite tiny, and I'm just going to sprinkle them on top. Just a few in each of the cells. If you've used celery seed in cooking, you already know what it looks like. Of course, you can't just use the celery seed that you cook with because it's probably been treated in order to prevent it from growing and sprouting. Now I'll just sprinkle a tiny bit of soil over each one and firm it in. It says 1/8 of an inch, so that's very little soil. I just want to have good contact with the planting surface. And now when we're ready with those, again, these planting units come with a dome. There are all kinds of different ones that are available, but the dome will help keep moisture in. We'll fill this bottom area with water and then put it under the lights. And in a couple weeks, the plants will germinate. Now, some plants prefer a dark area, and your package of seeds will tell you if they need dark, but most plants need some light to germinate. That's why I put them under the lighted area and why the domes are clear. Indoor humidity is really pretty low right now, and I've just put plain water in my sprayer, and I'll spray some of the house plants. These are the cuttings that we did in the fall, and they've really grown a lot. But when the humidity in the house gets to be 10 and 11%, if you don't have a humidifier, your plants do need to be occasionally sprayed to give them a little extra humidity. These are also sitting on a tray, which when I water them, the water goes into the tray, so that gives them a little extra boost of humidity. I've had these under my plant lights, but now that I'm starting seeds, I need to move them. So I'll be moving these to an area near the window, where hopefully we will have enough sun as the sun gets higher and the days get longer to keep them growing nicely. Most of these will go into containers outside when spring comes. Not until the end of May, 1st of June. So I'll keep pinching them off so that they'll stay bushy. The next thing I'm going to do is make a terrarium. And these are kind of a fun indoor project for gardening if you really are feeling like gardening and don't have any way to get outside, which we don't right now with all this rain. And what you'll need is a clear glass container. This will be a small terrarium. Terrariums are in kind of enclosed containers where plants grow with very minimal watering. And I'm going to put in a layer of charcoal first. This is a special charcoal for planting terrariums in containers with or without drainage holes. Now, it helps keep the soil sweet, and that's why you use the charcoal in a terrarium, because it improves the drainage and absorbs any harmful impurities. And you're going to have this in for a while, and it doesn't have any drainage. It's a clear glass container. This is a vase. That you can use any kind of dish that you happen to have. Flea market finds are very good for this sort of thing. The next thing I want to add is some soil, and I'm going to add just regular potting soil that I've mixed with a little vermiculite. And I'm going to add just a couple scoops of that. Again, it's slightly moist, not really wet. If you're working with a container that has a very narrow top, you can actually use tweezers to help with the next process, which is planting the plants. I've got these little plants, and they're kind of root bound, so I'm just going to break them apart. And I'm only going to use one of these, but I'm going to carefully kind of pull the roots out on it. And I have this little tool that I'm going to dig a nice little hole in here, and then we'll bury these roots. Nurseries have a variety of small plants that you can use in terrariums. These I can make even another planting in something, maybe in a deep saucer with a dome. They don't need to be watered too often. And again, this one, I don't know if it breaks apart or not. We'll see what its roots look like. This is kind of one major root ball. And we'll put that one in. Need to have a variety of forms. A lot of times there's gravel in also, or stones. This one I thought was kind of a cute little plant. Again, I'm taking some of their soil off so that I can put the one I have in here. And we'll push that in. As these plants grow, we can cut off pieces that grow too large. We want to keep these small. Add a little of the soil. And you don't want to water this too much. The pot is going to hold quite a bit of water. I probably will snip off some of these ends on this one. It's growing a little large. Move things around until you like them. These are often set on tables. They can grow with a bit of shade, kind of medium light. And often, when you plant a terrarium, they'll have something in it, an item of interest. And I have this little frog that I'm going to put in that one. And that's the basics of building a terrarium. You can choose plants. If you really want to not water it at all, you can put a piece of glass over the top. That will hold all the moisture in, and then you can remove it if you get too much. If you do need to water it, using a turkey baster with a little water in it, is one way to add a little and control the amount you add so that you don't get too much in there. You don't want it to be soggy. You want your plants to grow, but not to be soggy as they do grow, and to keep growing nicely in this. If the plants get too big, you can move them out and put them outside come summer in separate pots or add them to an arrangement. But it makes a nice little arrangement to have in the house over the winter. Again, as we go on, we'll be planting a lot more seeds. The amaryllis that I planted, this is an amaryllis. These plants were out in the garden last year. They had bloomed once, and now I have one that's blooming again. I'll put them back out next summer, and we'll see if the bulbs can expand to the point where they bloom again next year. But this one's about ready to bloom, so I moved it into this area so that we can see it a little more clearly. Now let's go in the kitchen and do a little preparation for St. Patrick's Day, which is coming up in the next few weeks.
Good, whenever you're ready.
We're going to do a few things today in preparation for St. Patrick's Day. It's also a good time to make some casseroles using things that you put in the freezer. It won't be long, a few months, until we can start harvesting some fresh things from outside. But also, you're going to want to work outside. Once this weather breaks, it's going to be time to get out there, and it would be nice to have a few meals socked away in the freezer so you can come in and quickly reheat something instead of spending your day cooking instead of outdoors when we have some nice weather. The first thing I'm going to get started and made are some Irish soda bread muffins. Again, these are a little different take on some St. Patrick's Day favorites. And Irish soda bread is one of those things that many people make. And these are Irish soda bread muffins. And they're a little different. They're a little sweeter and a little flavorful. I've got 2 3/4 cups of flour. And I've used a mixture of white flour and also white whole wheat flour. White whole wheat flour is not a mixture of white and wheat flour. It is actually a whole wheat flour made from a variety of wheat, which gives it a lighter color. So if you're trying to introduce whole wheat into your family's diet and they don't particularly like the dark color of regular whole wheat, the white whole wheat gives a nice lighter color, but you get all the benefits of the whole grain. Next, I'm going to add some sugar, and I'll use 1/3 cup. I've pre-measured these to make it go a little faster. And then we have 2 teaspoons of baking powder, 1/4 teaspoon of baking soda, and baking soda is a hallmark of Irish soda bread, of course, and 1/2 teaspoon of salt. We'll mix those dry ingredients. The other thing that's generally in Irish soda bread is caraway seed, and you can use anywhere from 1/2 to 2 teaspoons of caraway seed. I went kind of right down the middle with that. Depends how much you like it. If you want, you can even leave it out, but it does traditionally flavor it. The next thing is 1 1/2 cups of currants. You could also use raisins, but this is another classic thing that is in Irish soda bread. We mix the dry ingredients. This is the muffin method of mixing things, which is all the dry ingredients are mixed together, and then we're going to mix all the wet ingredients together and then combine them. And I've already got a cup of buttermilk, and I'm going to add 1/3 cup of oil and 1 egg. And I'll mix that with a fork until that egg is broken up and everything's mixed together. When making muffins, you don't want to overmix the ingredients once you've added the dry to the wet. If you do, you'll have muffins with big peaks on top. And if you've ever had muffins with peaks on top, they probably were also a little tough. because you develop the gluten in the flour, and that toughens the muffins. So basically for this method, you don't want to just beat it for minutes or so in the mixer. You want to just moisten the dry ingredients. You know, just so that there's nothing left of those, but everything's nice and moist. I don't use muffin papers very often. I just spray the muffin tin with cooking spray, Pam. But if you do use the papers, it's a good idea to also coat those with cooking spray. Then they'll come out easily and not stick to the muffins. We fill these quite full. You'll notice I sprayed the whole pan, so if they come up over the top and we have some nice muffin tops, you've gotten those a little too full. We'll divide it into the dozen cups of the muffin pan. We'll take all of the batter. Make sure that each one has currants. And if you wish, you can sprinkle more sugar on top before you put them in the oven. But I'm just going to put these in the oven for about 20 minutes. This is a 400-degree oven. Most muffins cook at a fairly high temperature. I'm going to be making an Irish dessert, and it's going to be a green dessert, and it's going to be a grasshopper cheesecake. Grasshopper pie is quite popular. This is a little different take on that. And I'm going to be using some unflavored gelatin, and I'm putting that into a pan, and then we'll put in half a cup of water. And this needs to soften in the water. When you use unflavored gelatin, it needs to soften for a few minutes. Then you can put it on the stove and heat it just until it dissolves. It's kind of a grainy mixture right now, and we want that to dissolve and become a clear liquid. While that's heating, I'm going to make a crust for the cheesecake, and I'm using crushed chocolate wafers. Now, I made these chocolate wafers from a King Arthur website recipe, but you can buy the chocolate wafers at the store and just crush them up either in the food processor or with a rolling pin in a plastic bag. To this, we're going to add a tablespoon of sugar and mix that, and 3 tablespoons of melted butter. And I'm going to mix that around within the crumbs. It's still going to be quite crumbly. But it will make a crust. And I'm using a 6-inch springform pan. The original recipe was 8 inches for a 9-inch springform pan. However, there's only 2 of us here, and we can't eat that much, so I'm making half a recipe. And I'm putting a piece of parchment paper in the bottom so that I can get it out more easily. This works quite well. Usually you would serve it right on the base of the springform pan once you unmolded it. But if you have a recipe that calls for a 9-inch springform pan and you cut it in half exactly, it will make the right amount for a 6-inch springform pan. I'm going to put about half of this crumb mixture into the bottom of the springform pan. And spread it out and pat it down. And that will form the base crust for this cheesecake. Maybe a little bit more. I'm going to use the rest of it later. And by now our gelatin has softened nicely. We want to keep it liquid. I'll bring that over here. And in my mixing bowl, I have 4 ounces of cream cheese. And to that I'm going to add some sugar. Would be, for a full recipe, 3/4 of a cup. For a partial recipe, 1 1/2 quarters, which is 1/4 plus 2 tablespoons. And I'm going to mix that well until it's fluffy. Spatula out. And I'll scrape that down a little bit. And we're going to gradually beat in the dissolved gelatin. And again, scrape it down a bit. It's fairly liquid now. And we're going to slowly add 3 tablespoons of creme de menthe. And this is what gives the grasshopper cheesecake its green color. Many grasshopper pies have cream de cocoa in them as well. You could also divide it and add some of that. And we're going to add about 2 1/2 tablespoons. And mix that in. And again, scrape it down a bit. Remove the beater. And the next thing we're going to add is 1 cup of cream, which has been whipped. This is a no-bake recipe for the most part. All you have to do is add the gelatin. And when you're adding whipped cream to something, you can mix in a little bit at first to kind of get it started mixing. And then I'll use a whisk to fold in the rest. We want to keep the airiness of the cream intact. And we'll fold that in. So it's a nice uniform color. And then I'm going to add half the mixture to the pan. And spread that around over the top of the crumbs. We have a nice even layer. Then I'll spoon the rest of the crumbs in an even layer over the top. So this has kind of a two-layer effect with the chocolate in the middle and at the bottom. Spread it out a bit. Then we'll put the rest of the cheese mixture over the top. And push it out towards the edges to cover up all those crumbs. The idea is you don't want to mix the crumbs into it at this point. You want to have a distinct layer. Smooth off the top a little bit. I've put some of the cream that I whipped into a pastry bag, and I'm going to pipe a little design around the top. Just a few fluffs of the whipped cream. Give it a nice edge when it comes out. It's already starting to set because of the coldness of the cream and the gelatin. So we'll just go around the top of that. And then we put it into the refrigerator, and this needs to set for several hours until it's nice and firm. Right now you can see it still jiggles. We want it nice and firm. The last thing that I'm going to do is my take on corned beef and cabbage. And I'm going to make a Reuben casserole. And a Reuben sandwich includes corned beef, cabbage, in the way of sauerkraut, and Russian or Thousand Island dressing, and Swiss cheese, and rye bread. And all of those elements are found in this dish. It's a little bit different, but it is a tasty way, and it does include all of those things. It's not a traditional boiled dinner, but it is sauerkraut and cabbage. I've drained the sauerkraut, 1 can of it. And to that I'm going to add some onions, about 1/4 cup of chopped onion. And again some caraway seed, 1 teaspoon. Another traditional thing in that Reuben sandwich, in the bread. My rye bread does not have caraway seed for that reason. And I'll mix this up well. And we'll add it to a greased casserole dish. You can also use an 8-inch pan for this, but I think a casserole dish is a little nicer looking. Let's see. I've got 2 cups of Swiss cheese, and I'm going to use 1 cup of it now. Layer that on. And then I'm going to use Thousand Island dressing. Reuben sandwiches can either have Russian or Thousand Island dressing, and I actually made this version of it. There are various stories about the origin of Thousand Island dressing, but the Thousand Islands in New York State seems to be where it was popularized if it wasn't invented there. And I'm going to put about 1/3 of a cup on. I made it, it's basically mayonnaise and ketchup and pickle relish, and you can add some onion and hot sauce and other things. There are other things in it, islands as it were. Russian dressing is just basically ketchup and mayonnaise with some hot sauce usually, and maybe a little onion or garlic. But they're very similar, and both are used in Reuben sandwiches depending on where you get your Reuben sandwich. So we'll use add a little bit more there. And then we'll add a layer of corned beef. This is a 1/2 pound of corned beef sliced thin. And I'm just going to add this over the top in a good layer. It's going to be a pretty meaty casserole. We could cut this in pieces, I suppose, if you wished, but you can also cut it after to serve it. And we're going to add the remaining cheese and spread that out. It's another cup of Swiss cheese. And another 1/3 cup of the dressing. So corned beef that got away. This is a recipe that was given to me by a friend, and we've had it a number of times and enjoy it quite a lot. We have one more thing to add, and that would be the rye bread component. And I have cubed up rye bread, and I have a 1/4 cup of melted butter. And I'm going to just stir these into the melted butter. These will get crisp once they're in the oven on top of the casserole. So we're going to put those along the top, spread them out on the top of it. And this will be the Reuben casserole. This will go in the oven then for about 1/2 hour. And it'll become nice and crisp. It's at 375 for 35 minutes. And our muffins are ready to come out of the oven. And these are our Irish soda bread muffins. And I'll put one over here on the plate. When you make muffins, it helps to prevent them from being soggy if you just tip them in the pan for a few minutes before you put them on a rack to cool. This keeps them nice and crisp. And if they don't come out very easily, you can always use a knife on any sticky spots. hopefully they will pop right out. And we have, and this is the dessert as it's finished. I had made another one to serve. And this is the grasshopper cheesecake. And I put a little chocolate wafer cookie that I cut, instead of in a round, I cut it in a shamrock shape to add to that. So this is our St. Patrick's Day dinner, Irish soda bread, and a grasshopper cheesecake, and Reuben casserole. I thank you for joining me today for a walk in the garden. Even though we didn't get outside in the garden too much, hopefully that will come soon. I'm Liz Davey, and you're watching this on Norfolk Community Cable Television, NCTV.